saying that I wanted to thank Rachel and the Economic Warfare Institute, the ACD, for organizing this conference. I've already learned a great deal, as I'm sure you have. And I should also say that I drafted these remarks before I was aware that Chairman Rogers would be speaking to us, and so on. Although this is a somewhat downbeat presentation, I can tell you that after hearing him on a somewhat more upbeat mood. This is probably about the 5th or 6th conference of this sort that I've been to since I left office, devoted to analyzing cyber threats and the strategies for meeting them. I've attended either as a participant or as a spectator. Of course, that doesn't include at least 2 that I attended while I was Attorney General, or the many meetings that I attended that were addressed to this problem in what seems to be the bygone days of 2007 to 2009. Now, of course, we've had successes in cracking this or that cyber attack, some launched domestically, some originated abroad, and even arresting some perpetrators, usually very youthful perpetrators, usually people from behind what was formerly the Iron Curtain, and is now a place where people have a lot of spare time. We've cooperated across national boundaries through the G8 High-Tech Crime Group, which includes more than 50 countries, perhaps even more remarkably, across bureaucratic boundaries within our own government. There's been cooperation between the public and private sectors through a cyber fusion center in Pennsylvania that brings together private parties and government investigators to collaborate in solving breaches and detecting cyber threats. But I think it's also fair to say that from a large macro standpoint, we're really not much nearer to solving this problem of unauthorized entry into and use of our computer systems than we were 5 years ago when I first started becoming acquainted with this. Now, that's not to say that there's necessarily a comprehensive approach that would work. Comprehensive being one of those words that often makes me wish I didn't live in a state with restricted gun laws. After all, we haven't come up with a comprehensive approach to crime, and that's been with us since the Garden of Eden. But at least we have laws against crimes, and at least a comprehensible, if not a comprehensive way of applying them. We really don't have that in the cybersphere. That's not to say we've been short on pronouncements. Back in May of 2011, the White House issued a 25-page document entitled International Strategy for Cyberspace, subtitled Prosperity, Security, and Openness in a Networked World. I've always thought that perhaps a further subtitle to that document after Prosperity, Security, and Openness might be pick 2 out of the 3. so long as the 2 you pick aren't security and openness. The document, although it's entitled a strategy, really doesn't purport to lay out ways of achieving the desirable outcomes that its title suggests. For example, of the 25 pages in the document, a page and a half are devoted to defense, which is said to consist of dissuading and deterring. Dissuading, according to this document, is achieved by developing strength at home and strength abroad. Deterrence by holding out to criminals the prospect of investigation, apprehension, and prosecution. And to larger scale hostile actors in cyberspace, the promise that, quote, when warranted, the United States will respond to hostile acts in cyberspace as we would to any other threat to our country, unquote. The document then goes on to list the means by which we will respond: diplomatic, informational, military, and economic, with the assurance that all options will be exhausted before resort to military, that the costs of inaction will be weighed against the costs of action, and that when we do act, it will be in a way that, quote, reflects our values and strengthens our legitimacy, seeking broad international support whenever possible. Now, I'm sorry, that's not the kind of thing that is going to make either Ahmadinejad or our friend in North Korea lose any sleep. It seems to me small wonder that after that document was issued in May of 2011, Defense Secretary Leon Panetta received a letter in July of 2011 signed by both the chairman and the ranking member of the Senate Armed Services Committee, reminding him of his obligation under existing law to address and define the policies and legal authorities necessary for the Pentagon to operate in the cyberspace domain, and saying that that obligation has not yet nearly been met. Now, there have been attempts at making those abstract goals of the White House paper concrete, but not noticeably successful ones. In 2012, there were attempts to expand existing legislation that criminalizes computer hacking, so as to give the federal government the lead in setting standards for protecting sectors of our infrastructure, not by legislation, but rather by adaptive regulation. Try to strike a balance between security demands and privacy concerns by providing for information sharing between the federal government and the private sector, with liability protection for those who do share information, and to increase penalties for violation. All of that, very ambitious, went down in flames under fire from both the right and the left. Indeed, it went down twice in the Senate. In the private sector, the lawyers who make a living from existing laws and from successfully extending those laws to frontiers for which they may or may not be suited have been busily at work. Cases filed in the wake of data penetrations have established that if a company is arguably negligent in its data security policies and a plaintiff suffered either actual damages as a result of a breach, whether, for example, as a result of identity theft, or damages when there is a credible reason to fear that there will be identity theft, the plaintiff has a claim. When the issue of impact can be proved on a class-wide basis without the need for individual fact inquiries, then data breach cases can be maintained as class actions. So far as the one comforting ruling in this area is that so long as somebody has simply been put in fear by the prospect of a breach and either can't prove negligence clearly or show imminent damage, they can't yet make a case. But hold on, the lawyers are coming. Just as an aside, there are those who think that the Supreme Court decision recently in Clapper versus Amnesty International, which held that fear of prosecution for material support of a terrorist organization cannot confer standing to sue, somehow raises the bar even further in data breach cases. I don't read that case that way. I read it as unique to the national security area, and I think it provides very little comfort to companies that think it's going to be difficult to sue over fear of data breaches. We're notably further along now than we were 2 years ago, when the leadership of the Senate, I meant to say, are we notably further along now than we were 2 years ago, when the leadership of the Senate Armed Services Committee figuratively stamped their busted rounds on the sidewalk and demanded that the Defense Secretary issue a clear statement of policies and legal authorities. Of course, we're 2 years further along, and events have a way of not stopping. Whether we have policies in place to meet them or not is another question. The Chinese, as we heard, are continuing to engage not only in economic but also in propaganda and even military warfare over the internet. They've hacked into computers not only of private industrial corporations in search of information useful to them economically, but also into the computers of journalists at the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, in search of where those publishers and others are getting their information about China and what that information is, and into the computers of the Pentagon, which they bombard by the millions of times each day. Recently, as you heard, a company called Mandiant issued a detailed report, with which I'm sure many of you are familiar, that identifies a particular unit within the People's Liberation Army, Unit 61398, located near Shanghai, as an advanced persistent threat of the highest order, APT-1, and describes its prolific conduct from servers in 13 countries that's managed to compromise more than 140 organizations and shown the ability to steal dozens of organizations simultaneously and in a coordinated way. For those who haven't seen it, I recommend the report. Don't read it before you go to sleep. We've also seen our own government remarkably, perhaps improvidently, take at least partial credit for introducing a computer virus into the uranium enrichment facilities of Iran, with the result that centrifuges spun out of control and destroyed themselves, even as their computer monitors continued to show that the centrifuges were operating normally. Unfortunately, simultaneously, we issued a statement saying that if a foreign power acted in that fashion in the United States so as to cause physical damage, we would reserve the right to respond with kinetic force. Talk about a disjointed message. We've also disclosed recently that the Defense Department will add 4,000 people to Cyber Command, which, until that cohort arrives, is fewer than 1,000. And at that unit, Cyber Command will pick up a national defense mission to protect critical infrastructure by disabling would-be aggressors. And there is as well a report that the administration has decided that it has the right to strike first when it perceives what it believes is an imminent danger of serious cyber attack in this country. Now, I should say I welcome both of those stats. As to the first, recall a meeting with General Alexander, the Director of Cyber Command, in 2008, when he said that his mandate ran to the .mil network and perhaps to the .gov segments of the internet, and that when he saw a threat to the .com portion, he had no authority whatsoever other than to look at the screen and say, ooh, that's going to be a bad one. It even got to the point where some commentators were suggesting that the government create a secure, closed internet for those agencies and functions that have national security ramifications, sort of an internet with side rails like a hospital did, and leave the rest of the Facebook and Twitter enthusiasts. I think the impracticality of separating military and governmental on the one hand from civilian on the other has become apparent, and that proposal is mercifully dead. As I said, the administration's more forward-leaning view on how it has to deal with cyber threats is, at least to me, a welcome change. But even as we applaud it, we should be aware of the danger, as was pointed out by General Hayden in an enormously perceptive article. We are backing into a situation not unlike where we stand in some ways in a war on terror. Just the same way we keep getting wrapped around the axle and try to decide where and how to try terrorists, and are unwilling to take any newly captured ones to Guantanamo. We seem to be, and are torn between civilian courts and military commissions. Can't bring ourselves to develop a coherent strategy for capturing and interrogating. But seem to have had little hesitation in launching lethal drone strikes. We are much neater, and don't, which are of course much neater, and don't present the nasty problem of where or under what conditions to confine someone. We are doing very much the same thing in the cyber area. We're backing ourselves into a situation where the only strategy we seem to be willing to adopt is a strategy of retaliation, until I heard the prospect that Chairman Rogers raised of actual intelligent defense. The National Security Agency and Cyber Command, both headquartered at Fort Meade, certainly could contribute to the conversation. But having people run around in fright wigs conjuring images of Big Brother has tended to prevent that from happening. Our responses to cyber threats, whether those threats are realized in actual attacks or not, are going to be governed by the same general rules of engagement that apply to the use of conventional force. But in order to build a robust defensive system, we're going to have to do something very much like what Chairman Rogers was talking about, and I look forward to seeing his bill in market. Thanks very much.